Dun 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 dun. Bum ba-dum. Bum ba-dum. Bum 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 bum.
I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event today. I'm sorry I couldn't be here in person. I'm afraid I'm double booked. It turns out I'm about halfway across the building teaching a class right now. So if you can excuse my digital presence, I'm afraid it's the best I could do under the circumstances. My name is John Kinsey. I'm a professor here at BCC Front Range Community College campus. I focus largely on issues of structural inequality, generally on the issues of economics and justice, but ultimately I spend most of my time looking at the relationship between the individual and their society. I was invited to speak on the philosophy of inclusion and strategies for creating an environment in classrooms in which students would feel comfortable talking about their views, especially if their views don't match the views of other students or their teachers. In order to do that, I thought the most efficient thing to do would be to kind of lay out what it is that's happening in a humanities class, or what it is that's happening in a classroom when political and social issues come up. In order to do that, I want to kind of do a brief survey of the different disciplines here at BCC and kind of try to tease out some of the tools that everyone's using so that you can understand how to use them yourself. So let's start with just a painting in broad strokes, looking at the differences between the physical sciences and the humanities. In the physical sciences, primarily what we're talking about is the exploration of underlying relationships of causality, whereas in the humanities, we're more looking at the history of ideas, the history of values, and the history of norms. While these are two different spheres, to be certain, they are nevertheless using the same methodologies. The only fundamental difference is in the data sets that they're looking at. That is, one is looking at the realm of ideas and one is looking at the physical world. They both, however, are invested in challenging you in particular ways. The only difference is between the physical sciences and the humanities is the nature of the challenge. Probably one of the best scholars for offering us a framework for understanding how the humanities approaches topics like politics and society would be the late historian Howard Zinn. Howard was keenly aware of how challenging it is to talk about politics and society while maintaining a neutral position. To the question of neutrality, Howard Zinn was aware of the fact that as academics we're obligated to be as objective as we can and that we should offer our students a safe space to explore ideas fairly. What that means is that we have to weigh various perspectives on their own merits as well as how they interact with the larger world. One of the things that was unique about Howard Zinn, however, was that he was not convinced that it was possible to truly be neutral. That is to say, yes, we evaluate ideas using the same criteria, the same rules, but not all ideas will pass the requirements of good reasoning and critical thought. Learning what ideas stand up to scrutiny and what ideas don't is the foundation of what education is about. And Howard offers us a fantastic metaphor to illustrate his intent with his famous suggestion that we think of culture as a moving train. That is, that the culture you're born into is moving in a particular direction and it will be headed in a direction after you are gone, and your influence on what direction the train of culture goes is dependent almost entirely on your education. Bearing this in mind, Howard offers one of his most famous quotes, and that is that there is no neutral position on a moving train. To quote him directly, "I don't believe it's possible to be neutral. The world is already moving in certain directions, and to be neutral or to be passive in a situation like that is to collaborate with what's going on. And I, as a teacher, don't want to be a collaborator."
History is important. If you don't know history, it's as if you were born yesterday. And if you were born yesterday, anybody up there in a position of power can tell you anything, and you have no way of checking up on it.
So this takes us to the task of trying to teach people how to actively participate in their culture, or how to pay attention to where the train is going. In order to do this, we need to learn the basic rules about how to be reasonable. It's important to understand that these rules are applied not only to scholars but to students as well. In my experience, the simplest way to explain how to be reasonable is by just following 4 simple rules. The first one is recognizing falsifiability. We have to be willing to accept that we might be wrong about whatever it is that we're asserting. Second, it's important to realize the burden of proof. Whoever makes the assertion, whoever makes the claim, has the responsibility of trying to prove it. In the way that they do prove it is with evidence, but it's important to realize that whatever you offer to support your claim has to be something that's accessible to everyone. And if we take all 3 of these rules together, we get equality. That is, all ideas are treated equally. All ideas are treated with the same level of scrutiny. It's important to realize, however, that in academia, what we're trying to do is disprove ideas. So let's go down the list one by one. Starting with falsifiability, like I said earlier, I'm a philosopher, and in case you hadn't noticed, philosophers are uniquely committed to the principle of falsifiability. In fact, it's almost annoying when you talk to a philosopher and you realize that you're dealing with someone who would be perfectly happy accepting the possibility that they don't exist. That's how committed philosophers generally are to the principle of falsifiability. They're willing to consider that even the most basic ideas might not be true. While philosophers are unique in their commitment to this idea, they are not unique in their obligation to follow this idea. All academic disciplines are committed to the principle of falsifiability. Therefore, if you're in every class you'll ever find yourself in, everything that a teacher tells you is true. What they mean, or what is implied by that, is what they're telling you hasn't yet been disproven. So one of the things that can be confusing for students is, or one of the unstated principles of education, is that this idea of falsifiability is something that we expect from our students as well. So because of this mutual commitment to falsifiability, it's important to recognize that your professor's job is to challenge whatever ideas you bring with you, so that you can either find good reasons to continue to hold on to them or good reasons to let them go. I often tell my students, if you walk out of my class at the end of the semester with the same beliefs and worldview that you had when you came in, then I failed you. My job is to either give you good reason, new reasons, deeper and stronger reasons for whatever your beliefs are, or good reasons for abandoning them and adopting new ones. It's important to realize, however, that no one's trying to tell you what to think. Rather, this is the awkward process of trying to teach you how to think on your own. So as the saying goes, a good teacher doesn't give you an answer, but rather shows you where to look for one. And one of the most counterintuitive places that we push you to look is in the opposite direction of whatever you asked. This is very useful because it teaches you to have an informed opinion. If you cannot fairly summarize the other side of any given argument, then you don't have an informed opinion about that topic. The final goal is not to have an idea that you'll never change your mind about, but rather to have a clear idea of what would be necessary to change your mind. To our second proviso, the burden of proof, this rule is very simple, but the impact it has is actually surprisingly profound. Whoever makes a claim has the burden of proving it. That's it. That's the rule. 95% of the lectures that you'll ever get in college are your teacher upholding the burden of proof. But to kind of give you a real-time example of how this works, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Calvin and Hobbes are trying to decide how many marbles are in a jar. And Calvin offers up the suggestion that there are 1 billion marbles in the jar. Now Hobbes, knowing, what the number billion is, what marbles are, and what jars are, responds with, I don't think that's right. I don't think it's possible for there to be 1 billion marbles in the jar. Calvin then says, well, how many are there? And Hobbes gives an honest answer, I don't know. So Calvin takes the assertive and argues against Hobbes, saying, unless you can prove there's not 1 billion marbles, my answer wins. At least I offered an answer. And Hobbes rolls his eyes and decides he thinks Calvin's being unreasonable. Now, we have to be very careful when determining who needs to prove what. In our Calvin and Hobbes case, Calvin offers an answer, and then Hobbes, based off of the observable universe, discredits that answer. If Calvin wants to make the claim that there's 1 billion marbles in the jar, it's his job to offer evidence to support it. He can't just shift the burden to Hobbes, because Hobbes never claimed to know how many marbles were in the jar in the first place. Our third proviso is evidence, and there's 3 simple rules when it comes to evidence. The first is whatever you're using as evidence has to be verifiable, and it's not always practical to go out and literally see whatever that evidence is with your own eyes, but anything used as evidence must be accessible to everyone. Also, it's ideal if this evidence is repeatable. Now, not everything can be repeated, but to qualify as good evidence, the results must be something that will be repeated should the conditions that cause it be repeated. And lastly, the sample size must be appropriate. That is, how large is the sample that you're comparing to the whole? It's important to remember that one member of a set does not necessarily represent the entire set. If you meet one philosopher and they're hilarious, that doesn't mean that all philosophers are going to be hilarious. Let's take a minute to consider some common mistakes people make when the topic being discussed is politics and society. One frequent mistake is a particular fallacy known as the appeal to belief. This is a mistake people make when they confuse the difference between making a truth claim and reporting the truth claim of others. If I say, those people over there believe the world is flat, I'm making a claim about what they believe, not whether their beliefs are true or false. It's not as if I'm saying that the world is flat. I'm simply saying those people over there believe the world is flat. This may seem painfully obvious, but it is nevertheless a common source of confusion. Pay close attention in this example to how former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich confuses the difference between what people believe to be true and what is actually true.
Violent crime is down. The economy is ticking up.
It is not down in the biggest cities.
Violent crime murder rate is down.
Then how come it's up in Chicago, up in Baltimore, and up in Washington?
There are pockets where certainly we have not tackled
your national
murder
capital, your third biggest city.
But violent crime across the country is down.
The average American, I will bet you this morning, does not think crime is down, does not think they are safer.
But it is. We are safer, and it is down.
No, that's your view. I just told no.
These are the national FBI facts.
But what I said is also what I said is also a fact.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's only a fact that that's a feeling people have. This is a graph of the violent crime rate. It's not a Rorschach test. You can't infer anything you like from it. And sure, you can cherry pick recent upticks in some cities, but the overall trend across the country during the Obama presidency, and indeed for the last 25 years, is down. But Newt wasn't done.
The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics which theoretically may be right, but it's not where human beings are.
But what you're saying is, but hold on, Mr. Speaker, because you're saying liberals use these numbers, they use this sort of magic math. This is the FBI statistics. They're not a liberal organization.
No,
they're a crime
but what I said is equally true. People feel more threatened.
Yes, they feel it, but the facts don't support it.
As a political candidate, I'll go with how people feel, and I'll let you go with the theoreticians.
So, the difference is, it is true that people feel a certain way about an issue, but that isn't the same as their ideas about that issue being true. This comes up a lot in philosophy, specifically in philosophy of religion, but in pretty much any topic. It's important for students to realize what it means to discuss belief, because in philosophy we can discuss the beliefs of others without necessarily advocating or denying them. This is the first step towards understanding belief, and the purpose is to increase our understanding of other perspectives by hearing what other people have to say. This can be applied not just to religion, but to everything. All ideas can be viewed with this same approach. We can understand ideas without advocating or denying them. And if your ideas are vastly different than your other classmates, then you've got an opportunity to broaden their views as well as your own. Because if it turns out that they've got good reasons for their belief that you hadn't considered, then you'll learn. And if you have good reasons for your belief, that they haven't considered, then they'll learn. And da-da-da, that's how learning works. So, to kind of sum it up, remember, first we have falsifiability. That is the rule that you have to be willing to acknowledge the possibility that you could be wrong. And if you want to be intellectually thorough, you should be willing to actively try to disprove your own ideas. In order to do this, you also have to recognize the burden of proof, which is realizing that if you make a claim, the obligation is on you to prove it, and that you have to use evidence that is accessible to everyone. When it comes to evidence, we have to be careful how we gather that evidence, where and who we gather it from, and how representative that evidence is of the set that we're trying to make a conclusion about. And if we take all three of these together, it'll take us to the equality of reason, because it's important that we recognize that all ideas are subject to this level of scrutiny, because this is what education is. It is my view that these 4 points are the cornerstone for not only being a reasonable human being, but also for broadening knowledge and education in general. This approach might seem counterintuitive to some people, because it often leaves us realizing more of what we don't know than what it is that we can know. But to quote Richard Feynman, sometimes it's better to have questions without answers than it is to have answers that are not questioned. Well, that's all I got. I wanted to stop and thank you for giving me the opportunity once again to speak on this issue. I sincerely hope these tools provide you the means to gain insight into perspectives that would otherwise be out of your reach, and to help broaden tolerance and understanding both in your classroom and in your lives.
Dun 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 dun. Bum ba-dum. Bum ba-dum. Bum 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 bum.